I'm outraged, saddened, and immensely disappointed that the Supreme Court would turn its back on so many of America's citizens, stripping us of the dignity to make our own decisions about our bodies, lacking the respect for us, our autonomy, and our right to control our bodies and lives. This is a personal attack and incredible danger to the lives of so many women across this country, particularly those of lower income and women of color who will be disproportionately impacted. We must continue to fight for these women, to turn our outrage into fighting for what is truly right.
As the father of 2 young adult daughters, I'm saddened and alarmed that my daughters will have fewer rights than their mother or grandmothers. The decision affects all of us, and we must care as a community and work together to impact change.
I just feel like we've gone back in time. I never imagined that I would have fewer rights than the women of my mother's generation. It's funny how it takes decades to create history and moments to unravel it.
I have lived in communities where I have seen harm done to women who were suppressed and could not speak up or have an opinion or freely talk about sex or reproductive health care or ask for help if abused, and often put to shame for being pregnant if raped. The Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe is an attack on basic human rights, and we must fight back. I am in this fight because as a mom and a woman, I want to make sure that it's a better world for my daughter and our next generation, so that they have the fundamental right to choose, make a decision that is best for their well-being, have access to safe reproductive health care, and live a life of dignity.
As a young woman, I am incredibly saddened by Friday's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. This decision, while number one being an incredible invasion of privacy and bodily autonomy, also does not stop abortions, it stops safe abortions. I am deeply saddened by the number of women who require abortions as a form of treatment for ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages who will be denied their basic right to health care as a result of this decision. Now more than ever, it is important for all women and all people to stand up, use their voice, and fight back against this infringement of human rights.
The overturning of Roe v. Wade shows me that as a woman in this country, my choices matter less than the choices of a man. It is appalling to me that in the year 2022, I have less rights as a woman than my mother did when she was my age. And I'm appalled that this decision will result in gruesome deaths for more people, whether through suicide, domestic violence, or inadequate medical care. I am devastated to see the impact of this decision in the future.
I am appalled and angry at the recent Supreme Court decision to strike down Roe in the name of pro-life. How is it pro-life when now women and girls, due to circumstances, are forced to seek less safe and risky abortions that could actually cost their own lives and potentially leave some families motherless? How is it pro-life when a young girl, a child herself at the age of 10, 11, 12, may end up dying in childbirth because she's now forced to carry a pregnancy and give birth to a child that her body is not at all equipped for? There are many things that our government can do in the name of pro-life. Banning abortions is not one of them.
I was devastated to learn about the news on Friday. And all I want to say is that, abortion is a healthcare. It is a human right. A woman should have freedom to choose, and taking that freedom away from women does not just put women's life at risk, but also men and children. And what is at stake right now is not just women's rights, but also our democracy.
Welcome everyone to our discussion this evening about Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, which overturned Roe versus Wade. For the first time in our nation's history, the Supreme Court has extinguished a fundamental constitutional right. And in doing so, the Supreme Court overturned 50 years of precedent, ending the federal constitutional right to an abortion guaranteed to women and pregnant people nationwide. My name is Deepa Sharma, and it is my honor to serve as a board member for South Asians for America, or SAFA, a national grassroots organization launched in May 2021 dedicated to the education, advocacy, engagement, and mobilization of the South Asian democratic community in the United States at the local, state, and federal levels. Today, we are honored and privileged to be joined by an incredible panel of legal experts and community activists who will help us identify what the opinion means, its implications nationwide, what actions we can take, and the importance of engaging the South Asian electorate to factor in the importance of the judiciary when voting in the upcoming midterm election. We are joined by the president of NARAL, Timmaraju, the executive director of ACLU New Jersey, Amol Sinha, also joined by the president of the Pennsylvania chapter of National Organization of Women, Nina Ahmad. We're also joined by SAFA California's co-state director and cardiologist at Harbor UCLA Medical Center, Dr. Shai Roy, president, and then we're also joined by the president of the National Association of South Asian Law Students, or NASALSA, Shivani Parikh. And we're also thrilled to be joined by the Attorney General of the state of Wisconsin, Josh Kaul, who will be joining us in a few moments. And I'm honored to moderate the first part of today's panel, which will focus on the opinion itself, its impact practically and medically, and the focus on the South Asian community, its impact on organizations addressing domestic violence in the South Asian community. So first, the first question is for Amol. Just wondering if you could provide all of us with a brief summary of your key takeaways of the opinion and what this loss of this constitutional protection means for people in red states and blue states.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. And I know that there are experts on this panel that can probably speak to more of the nuances of the opinion. But in broad strokes, I'll just share, there is no more a federal right to, or a constitutional right to abortion in the United States. And that is really concerning for a number of reasons. It is, first of all, particularly jarring because we've seen instances, at least in my lifetime, of rights being granted to people, right, and of rights being said and articulated and held as existing, including the right to same-sex marriage, including the right to interracial marriage, the right to contraception, the right to same-sex relationships, intimate relationships, things like that. What we rarely see is a right being taken away. And that's what happened here. And so the folks who spoke in the video were absolutely right. Now people have fewer rights than they did a generation ago. And we went backwards 50 years. One of the takeaways that I have of this is that the Supreme Court, the majority opinion, did not care about political or public opinion. They did not care that they were doing something that was taking away a right. They did not care that they were doing something that had consequences. They did not care that they were doing something that they knew would lead to death. Like, we know for certain that people are going to be die as a result of this opinion. Because they will not be able to access the healthcare that they need in the times that they need it the most. So it's very concerning. What this means for the states. So what the opinion did was it left it to the states to decide the degree to which they want to allow abortion. And so what this means for the states is that there were several states, I think 9 states, that had trigger laws in place, which meant that if at any point the Supreme Court overturned Roe, their law banning abortion would take effect. And so those states, I believe it was 9, but somebody can correct me on that. Those states immediately, thank you. Those states immediately passed or had laws that went into effect that banned the right to an abortion in those states. So that meant that millions of people who could get pregnant were unable to access abortion effective immediately in those states. There are many other states, I believe a total of 26 that we're looking at, that have either already banned abortion or will do so soon. And I think for the states where there is more of an expansive view of constitutional rights, I think what we have to do is make sure that the right to an abortion is enshrined in state constitutions. We have to make sure that the right to an abortion is protected as a fundamental right in state law. And those are things that I'm grateful for New Jersey, because New Jersey has taken a step in making sure that it has codified the right to an abortion as a fundamental right protected by state law. And that only happened in January of 2022 in anticipation of this decision coming down. But I have to say that even in a state like New Jersey, we were working with a number of other organizations. We were on the front lines of this effort. I have to say, even in a state like New Jersey, where we have a Democratic governor, a Democratic legislature, a huge Democratic population, Democrats outnumber Republicans by over 1 million in New Jersey. And it was still extremely controversial. It was still difficult to get lawmakers to say the word abortion. It was still very difficult for people to talk about head on the right to an abortion existing at the state level. And our work isn't done. We still need access. So while we protected the right to an abortion, that right can be rendered meaningless if people can't afford it, right? And so what we need is access to affordable and equitable and safe and legal abortions in the United States across all of the states that are willing to take a step to protect it. The last thing I'll say about the opinion is that I want to point out the concurrence from Justice Thomas, which said that it's not just abortion that they're concerned about. It's every right that's covered under I know this is not a legal or not necessarily all lawyers in the audience, but there's a thing called substantive due process that was identified decades ago, by the Supreme Court, that said that just because a right is not enumerated in the Constitution, it does not mean that right does not exist. And what the court has done is taken steps under this theory or principle called substantive due process to create something or envision something called the right to privacy. And that right has covered a whole bunch of different other rights that we hold dear today and take for granted today. And that includes the right to same-sex relationships and marriage, and that includes the right to contraception. And so Justice Thomas's concurrence actually pointed to those other precedents that we have in the United States as things that need to be reconsidered. And so we're not, he's opening the door in his concurrence to litigation around these other fundamental rights, which is really, really concerning. And what I'm very, what I'm bracing for is that the conservatives or the folks that wanted to end Roe versus Wade, first of all, they'd been doing this for 50 years, right? Like they'd been stacking courts, finding plaintiffs, figuring out, representatives at every level, stacking local government and higher government to identify the perfect moment in which we could overturn Roe versus Wade. And they're not going to stop there, right? What I'm concerned about is that they're seeking out a federal ban on abortions altogether. And that's why the state work is so important and so crucial, because we need to protect whatever we can right now. And in the face of this opinion, the ACLU, with a bunch of partners all across the country, has filed many lawsuits in key states to try to keep the doors open to abortion clinics for as long as we can, because we know that every second counts, right? Every minute matters. There were people in waiting rooms in abortion clinics when the news came down and had to be turned away because the right was no longer available to them. So we're trying to keep the doors open for as long as possible. There are emergency petitions being filed. And also, just because the Supreme Court said that the constitutional right to an abortion does not exist, does not automatically mean that it can be criminalized. And so what we're doing is fighting against the criminalization of abortion, where many states have said that they're going to treat abortion as a felony. And so we're trying to fight back against that and keeping, trying to keep doors open, holding government accountable, and making sure that we can do whatever we can so that people can access this right. I know I'm out of time, so I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Amol, for giving us the summary and for sharing all the work that you're doing at the ACLU. Next, I'd like to turn it over to Minnie. Minnie, you've been on the front lines of you are on the front lines of reproductive rights, and you've been on the forefront of policymaking for decades. How did we get to the point where we have a Supreme Court right now that a race to constitutional right is on the precipice of erasing others? And what are the most effective means that we can undertake to protect what we have now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And thanks for having me. Amol covered a lot of it, but I'll underscore a couple of key points. So, Roe v. Wade became law of the land in 1973. I was born a month after. So it's been the law of the land my entire life. I used to work for Planned Parenthood in Texas. It's where I started working in the repro movement in the mid 2000s. There's been systematic chipping away at Roe from the minute it became the law. So we've had close to 50 years of what we call targeted restrictions on abortion providers, TRAP laws, being filed across the country, being enacted. So even though Roe fell Friday, there were large parts of this country where access to abortion was already really, really hard, almost impossible, particularly for marginalized folks and communities of color, rural communities, et cetera. So in Texas last year, the really draconian vigilante enforcement mechanism, SB 8 in Texas went into effect, and the court declined to act, in part, we think, because they were deciding on this decision, Dobbs. And as a result, we've already seen the effects of these types of laws in places like Texas for months and months. Since September to now. So it's important to note that just because Roe fell recently, to answer your question of how we got here because of a systemic, aggressive effort by the anti-choice, anti-abortion movement and the extreme religious right, culminating in the election of Donald Trump, right? So the minute Donald Trump was elected in 2016, we knew this was coming. We knew he would have a record number of appointees to the court. And it became very, very clear that his allies in the extremist GOP, increasingly extremist, now MAGA GOP, were going to make those appointments. And we now know those justices did not tell the truth to the senators, right? So this is a culmination of many, many factors, but it didn't all happen overnight. I think a lot of people, you don't spend your time thinking about abortion access until you need an abortion, right? So the average American, this is not something they spend all of their time thinking about. But those of us who work in this movement, we spend a lot of time thinking about it. And it's important. I'll share another couple of key points, then I want to talk about what we can do. This was never just about stopping Roe and ending Roe. Okay, it's really important to understand that. We know that there's no question that this decision has emboldened Republicans, extremist Republicans. They're already floating the idea of a nationwide ban. It's really important to understand that. So yes, why would you need a nationwide ban in addition to Roe being overturned? It's because while there are 26 to possibly 28 states poised to ban abortion and 13 with trigger bans, 9 that have immediately banned, there's still a lot of states like where Amol lives in New Jersey, where Nina and I live in Pennsylvania, California, New York. I want to say I'm going to miss a state, Colorado, Maine, Vermont, Oregon that are already doing really aggressive things to protect abortion access because now it's gone to the states. But if there's a federal abortion ban, that will supersede in a lot of cases. It's still sort of fuzzy, and Amol was probably a better expert on this than me. We're going to try to fight this, but we fight it by the ballot box. So there's a couple of things you can do. And I wanted to mention last year, in addition to all of this mess, we had over 500 restrictions at the state level filed on abortion access in anticipation of this decision. So they knew since Trump was elected, this was going to happen. There were already tons and tons of test cases. They filed more legislation, and now they're ready to enact a lot of really problematic, dangerous bills. So what can we do? What we can do, we can support abortion funds and providers. I saw it in your earlier slide. That's really important. If you know someone in your life who needs an abortion, you should go to abortionfinder.org. If you want to support abortion funds, it's the most efficient way to help people on the front line who need access. I know you're going to repost all those links. But you're a really great electoral and grassroots organization. So I'm going to talk about what you can really do, which is engage in your local elections. And it's really going to be important that you're engaging in your state and local elections. And yes, we're going to have to hold the House for a federal legislation to codify Roe. The Women's Health Protection Act was passed by the House Democrats. It's really important. They passed it. They did their job. Let's bring them back to finish the job. Senate Democrats tried really, really hard, but they fell short. I'm excited that Senator Bob Casey from Pennsylvania, who was a long holdout on this issue, finally changed his mind and joined Senate, the rest of his colleagues, but they were at 49, not 50. I think you can guess who the number 50 was. But we got to hold the Senate and add 2 seats. And then we have to abolish the filibuster. And then there's a chance to codify Roe at the federal level. But even more importantly, and Amol pointed this out, is the state by state battles. And so we're at the table with ACLU and Planned Parenthood in a couple of places. Kansas has a ballot initiative on August 2nd. So the Kansas Constitution actually protects abortion access, and extremist Republicans in the state are trying to remove that protection through a ballot initiative. It's going to be the first election contest in the country, first referendum on abortion. We have to win it. We have to win it. So I really encourage you guys, if you have friends, members, family members in Kansas, if you just want to go volunteer in Kansas, if you want to be part of a digital organizing effort to contact folks in Kansas, we're happy to work with you. I know ACLU is doing the same. So there's lots of ways to be engaged, but we have to win Kansas. We got to fight back in Kansas because it's going to send a chilling signal to the rest of the country. In the fall, we've got ballot initiatives in November in Michigan, in California, in Vermont. California and Vermont were in pretty good shape. Michigan's going to be one to watch. Michigan's going to be really important. The governor's race in Michigan is going to be important. You're going to be hearing from Josh Kaul. Attorneys general races are going to be important. We can send you guys a map and a list of the states where we've got folks like in Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro running against a crazy literal January 6th insurrectionist, Doug Mastriano, who has pledged to ban abortion in Pennsylvania. And Nina can talk more about how he could actually do it and how Governor Wolf has been vetoing bills, but he's term limited, so we got to replace him with Josh Shapiro. So there's a long list. I won't go on and on about it, but there's a lot you can do as an activist. And all of you are incredible, get out the vote machines. I worked with you in the last election. I know you can do it. And there is a chance to take our power back. There is a way to fight back. It's through the ballot box. I know no one wants to hear, oh, vote, that's the answer. But I hate to say it, it actually is the answer, because we can protect abortion access state by state through grassroots activation. And I'll stop there because I know I'm probably eating up other people's time.
Thank you so much. I did not know about Kansas. So knowing where the battlegrounds are, extremely
We'll get you all the information and you can blast it out to the membership. We'll work together on that.
Definitely. Thank you, Minnie. Our next question is for Dr. Shai Roy. Dr. Roy, how does this affect doctors and the ability to provide patient care? And what are you hearing from the South Asian medical community after this decision came down?
Thanks. And it's great to be on a panel with so many esteemed people who are so knowledgeable about this. I want to give you a little bit of perspective that hopefully that can arm us as we go into getting out the vote in our South Asian communities in the country and how to make this personal. more than 1/10 of U.S. physicians are South Asian background. And the enforcement mechanism for this is undoubtedly going to be targeting physicians and providers. It would be political suicide for red states to target the women themselves who are pursuing abortions. It's going to be to target the providers and the facilities that provide these in red states. And we've seen that in the past with restrictive abortion laws, and we're going to see an aggressive approach here, going over into the next year or two. And so, from a personal standpoint, there will be many South Asian physicians and physician practices and provider practices that are targeted by this. Additionally, as we talk to our families, South Asians that are born here are 1.5 more times more likely to access abortion services than the immigrant generation. And so this is something that should be personal to everybody. Nobody, there should be no cultural reticence to supporting these causes for these pro-choice causes. This can affect any of our families. And we're not immune to the issues that come along with this. And so this is going to be something that I think for Democratic voters, there's a lot of issues going into November, the economy, inflation, that I think, to be honest, we're among friends here, it's going to work against us. But this issue is personal to every family, every community in the country, and this is the issue we have to make sure that people vote for. And I'll end by this: gun violence and abortion rights are two things that we spend a lot of time on social media and talking to our friends about, and raises our emotions. But the reason that we haven't made progress is people don't vote on this. And that's the unfortunate thing. People don't vote on this to the degree that they talk about it. And so we have to make sure that we make that case that, no matter what else is going on politically in your state and your local elections, et cetera, you've got to vote for people who are pro-choice. You've got to vote for people who are pro-gun control and will take progressive action on these issues. And so, if people don't vote on it, nothing is going to change. And we got to make that case to voters going into November. So I'll end it there. But thank you again, and hopefully we can use this as a panel like this as a spur to action in the coming months in local and state and federal elections.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roy. I'm lucky to organize with you out here in California alongside Harini. Our next question is for Dr. Nina Ahmad. You're in Pennsylvania and you're so active. You've been active in the movement. I want to ask you, how is the decision reverberating through your community, and what is happening in the state of Pennsylvania, which obviously is a key swing state, which we saw in 2020?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, and thank you for having me. I just wanted to shout out to Harini and all the leadership at SAFA for hosting this event. I think it's really critical for our communities to hear from us, people who are in the trenches. And when you see someone who looks like you, that message is more accessible. So I think this is a really critical forum that you're doing, and you're recording it. I know some people call me to ask, they can't come, can they get to it? I said, yes, I checked with Harini, and she said, yes, that would be. So we will make sure we, send that out over and over again, because particularly for women and people who are immigrants and recent immigrants, that's who really need to see our faces and feel secure and safe. So I appreciate that. So in Pennsylvania, it's shockwaves, even though we know this was coming. We all knew this was coming. But nonetheless, people have made it very clear this is going to be such a public safety issue abortions happened well before they were legal. They're going to continue to happen. They continue to happen unsafely in places they don't have access to go and get a safe and sanitary abortion. So I think that underscores the other reasons people have abortions, not just to end a pregnancy, but for many other reasons. You have a physician on here who knows more than I do, but abortion is healthcare. Abortion is medical care, and it's one of the most safe medical procedures we have. And we need to underscore, as you said just earlier, to the voting public, that you are harming your health by not making this a political issue that you vote on. This is about public safety and your individual health. So I think Pennsylvania, what's happening, I just was on a radio show this afternoon and 2 days ago. We're using our radio waves and our airwaves and TV to really reach people. One, to let them know abortion is legal in Pennsylvania. And the only thing that is going to keep it legal is that veto pen that our governor has. And our current governor, as you heard, is termed out, and we have a governor's election coming up. And we don't control the legislature. It's actually every day trying ways to hinder us. So we're putting out the alarm, get registered, vote, make sure you understand this issue. On the sort of the provider side, we're trying to make sure people understand there's going to be an influx of people. On our western border is Ohio and West Virginia, where they can't get their abortions. So they'll be coming over to Pennsylvania. So as Minnie said, it would be great to send resources to abortion providers, both independent and the big organizations. And it's actually a problem in Pennsylvania that there are only 3 abortion providers in the West, and we have a very big state, and most of them are east of Harrisburg on the eastern and southeastern side. So we are a big state with 67 counties. 89% of our counties don't have abortion providers. So even if it's legal, it's really hard to get to. So, and as people have mentioned, it really is going to impact people with minimal resources. That is always the case, that, rich people are going to be jetting off wherever they need to. And those making below minimum wage, who are toiling at 3 jobs and can't afford another child or have some health issues they need an abortion for, are going to be stuck. So I think we're trying to mobilize people to put their donations where they can, open up homes when necessary, create a network of resources, which we will update regularly so that people can share and know what's going on. But most important, it is to say that you have to fight. And I think we have to give people hope. Hope is the most transcendental feeling people can have, to say they can control their destiny. And I think we have an ability to do that. And we'll talk later on. There's a question about what next, and we can talk more about that. But I think it's imperative for all of us who are in leadership positions to say, this is not the end run. Don't despair. There are ways you can move forward and keep people engaged and tell them what are those paths. So I'll end here and answer later on the other questions.
Thank you. And Nina, you were so right about people who are wealthier and people who are connected, will have means to get the healthcare that they need. But it's really the ones who don't have resources will be most impacted by this decision. My next question is actually for my co-moderator, Sonjui Kumar. Sonjui, I know you've been in touch with groups on the ground, especially in the South Asian domestic violence community. Could you describe for us the reactions from our community serving organizations?
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi everyone, and thank you to our amazing speakers. So I want to give a big shout out to Aparna Bhattacharya. She's my dear friend and fellow warrior in Georgia, and she's the executive director of Raksha. And so I spoke to her and to a few other folks. And, if you think about the community that she serves, the domestic violence community, this could not be worse. I mean, it's like a law that's on the side of traffickers and rapists and assault victims. So one thing that really impacted me is she said, clinics are first responders. I mean, when you shut down clinics, you shut down the place where maybe the 14-year-old who's had multiple abortions can be recognized as an assault victim, where, the young woman who's been raped, can come forward and say she's been raped. So when you take away and shut down health clinics that provide these services, you take away the first responders that can actually get more help for these victims. When you have forced pregnancies, you're actually continuing the assault that these survivors have already gone through. They've gone through an assault process. They've gone through an assault. They've been victims, and now you're having them continue that and continue the control of their assaulters by forcing them to carry these unwanted pregnancies. And then you're using the same tactics that are used by the rapists and the assaulters by exercising control over people and not letting them exercise control over their own bodies. So they've already been subject to unwanted control. And here you are, continuing the same with these restrictive abortion laws. So that was very impactful what the community is going through. Their group, SOAR, SOAR, has issued a number of statements, addressing these issues. So I urge you all to look into that and to consider as soon as you can. So with that, thank you, Deepa, and thank you, everyone. I hope all our speakers who are able to stay do stay on, because I'd like you to weigh in on some of these issues. I see that Attorney General Kaul has joined us. Welcome, Josh Kaul, to the session. And I wanted to just mention that I'm also a member of the SAFA board like Deepa, and I'm really honored to be speaking to you today. So Attorney General Kaul, you are everywhere today. We released a statement following Dobbs that stated, "We are at the crossroads for the future of reproductive freedom. And we need elected officials to step up and protect access to safe and legal abortion." You have said you are not going to, so Wisconsin, for everyone's information, is one of those states that had an old law, an 1849 law, that came back into effect or will come back into effect with the overturning of Roe. So you have said that you're committed to not using any of the resources of the Department of Justice of Wisconsin to enforce the ban. And you've also since filed a lawsuit challenging the law altogether. So Nina spoke a little bit about hope. I have hope in the fact that you met with a whole bunch of state attorney generals, actually the day before the decision. And we'd like you to tell us what's happening at the state level. What are these attorney generals planning, and what can we count on?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, thank you so much for having me. And I apologize for any audio issues and my screen bouncing around here. I'm coming to you from the passenger seat of a car, but it's great to be here. So first, as you said before, Wisconsin is a state that has a pre-Roe ban on almost all abortions. And we have had access to safe and legal abortion stop in Wisconsin in the last few days. It is already having an impact on women in our state. My office has started to receive contacts from sexual assault nurse examiners raising questions about emergency contraception and whether there's an exception under our old abortion ban for cases of rape and incest. And unfortunately, the answer to that question is no. Now, we are taking as many actions as we can, both to minimize the harm from the Dobbs decision, but also to work to restore reproductive freedom in Wisconsin. So the governor has been clear that he would grant clemency to anybody prosecuted under our old ban. I have also been clear that I'm not going to use any enforcement resources to investigate or prosecute anybody. And yesterday, the governor and I announced that we are filing a lawsuit seeking a declaratory judgment that the old abortion ban is not in effect in Wisconsin. We've argued that legislation that was passed after that ban was passed effectively repealed it by implication because the new legislation is inconsistent. For example, there's an exception for abortions to protect the health of the mother under newer law, but that isn't there under old law. So we are going to keep fighting this out in the courts. But I want to emphasize 2 points. To your point about hope, this has galvanized people. People are extremely disappointed with the Supreme Court, and that might be putting it mildly, with this ruling for stepping away from almost 50 years of precedent. And we need to make sure that we are directing that energy towards positive change advocating for legislators to take action, figuring out how we can work together. And we are certainly doing that. As I mentioned, I'm working closely with our governor, but we're also working with other AGs, as you indicated before. We had a meeting just the day before Dobbs came down with the vice president to talk about ways that we could be prepared to respond. And so, one of the things that came out of that is that AG Raul in Illinois and I had a discussion about ways that we could facilitate providing for both doctors and nurses in Wisconsin who provide access to abortion care to get set up with licensing clearances in Illinois so that they can provide services just across the border. It's not a substitute for what we had before, but we want to minimize the harm that's coming from this decision. And then the other thing that I cannot overemphasize is just how important 2022 is going to be. This will be remembered as the election that came after Dobbs, after Roe was overturned. And if the message that comes from that is that voters aren't going to stand for having their rights taken away, I think we're going to see rights expanded again. We're going to hopefully stop people from rolling back rights further. And if, on the other hand, the message is that, this didn't impact voters much, it didn't impact the elections, that's going to send a very different message that I don't want to see sent, and I'm confident nobody here does. So making sure that we stay active and engaged, not only on legislative issues, but through the 2022 elections is going to be critical. So thanks for having me. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have.
We're going to come back to you, Attorney General. I hope you can stay with us for just a little bit. I do want to turn to Shivani Parikh. Shivani, as most of you heard, is a law student, and she's president of the National South Asian Law Students Association. And so, Shivani, lots of folks aspire to be in your situation. They to become lawyers or attend law school in hopes of achieving some kind of a just and fair world. What are you hearing from your fellow law students, especially in the South Asian community? And by the way, we're counting on you guys to vote. So.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Everyone's been saying how they're so happy to be here. And I have to say, I'm really the one who's probably by far the most starstruck. And just, yeah, it's an incredible honor to be representing those of us who have recently joined law school and those of us who are aspiring to cross the bar soon and practice. So I think I'll first respond to the first part about law students, which is to say, I think folks, there's a national there's a national organization called If, When, and Now. And so most law schools do have a chapter for that organization. And I think it's also important to note that COVID really undermined student organizing and just the ability to bring people to campus to really have engaging conversations. The lack of food didn't help, which often brings people to the table, even if, the Grubhub credit was sort of making things work for a bit. So I think what then also becomes a challenge is for a lot of people who may not have been politically involved, whether that's in regards to like civic engagement traditionally in terms of voting, or in terms of other just sort of racial justice analysis, which is really required when we think about, and I'm going to get into that in a bit, but when we think about who the reproductive justice movement has historically been led by and centered, at least in the imagery of it. It can be intimidating to all of a sudden realize that as a lawyer, you're going to have a lot of ability, power, and responsibility to be knowledgeable and responsive to what's a very complex issue. And it's in line with that I think it requires talking about our community as a whole, the South Asian community, which is to say that we have a historic lack of lawyers in our community. And so I think that also makes things a lot more intimidating and uncomfortable because I think while I know that abortion, for example, is illegal in India, it can be at least a place where we can begin the conversation. But nonetheless, I think also have to acknowledge that sexual and reproductive health is nonetheless pretty stigmatized. And so how are we having this conversation as a launch point for people's political involvement if, that in and of itself is a bit of a barrier? The other thing too is we have a lack of public interest folks out of those of us who do choose to go to law school. And to be very frank with you, I think that while pro bono work at firms is incredibly important and we need private and public sector collaboration, the ultimate outcome of that also is that what does it mean to do systems level work and to push and collaborate with grassroots organizers if the primary mode of giving back for a lot of South Asian attorneys is through the pro bono hours at their firm. And so I think these are other things we have to think about how are we making as a community public interest more affordable? Are we providing summer stipends so that way students who don't receive one don't have to take necessarily the private sector offer? Are we incentivizing loan forgiveness and pushing for systems level work that way? Because the other thing that comes down to it is as many of us are first generation Americans, not everyone has intergenerational wealth to lean back on, and many people are taking out substantial loans that need to be paid back. So I think the last thing I would say is that in terms of building a pipeline, NASALSA is taking a cue from NABALSA, or the National Black Law Students Association, to create a cohort-based mentorship program this year called a Pre-Law Institute. So we want to match law students with pre-law students or undergrads. And so that way they feel that law school is less intimidating, because for a lot of us who wanted to come to law school, we Googled what the LSAT was and took it from there. And I think the last thing I will say is that I think for many of us, our parents understandably have a sense of fear when it comes to being visibly political. There's an idea that if you get involved with public office, or if you go to a protest, that you're putting yourself at risk for not being able to get a job, or if your face is in the paper, then what will people think? To quote from Hassan Minhaj, log kya karenge? But it's like, I think this is the time where we need to move forward, and we need to really show for our generation, for the next one, that if we don't speak up, then our rights will be not only taken away, but we're not going to be respected when we step into the movement for the first time, because people, they're presuming a model minority myth and a complacency from us. So yeah, that's everything I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Shivani. I can see why you're president of NASALSA, and thank you for your passion. And we look forward to leading the charge of the generation. So Attorney General Kaul, I don't know if you can come back to us, but I hope you can. So one of the things I know in our races is people wonder what it means to vote for an attorney general, what it means for a district attorney. A lot of folks skip over that part. If you could just give us a quick primer on what those positions mean and how someone like you can really have a huge impact on
how absolutely.
Thank
you for that question. So first I would say, I like to joke about this, but in 3rd or 4th grade, there's a class on, civics and how a bill becomes a law. And there's not a class on the role of the Attorney General. And so giving a bit of background is often helpful. The role varies from state to state, actually, in terms of the details. But in my state, we oversee an investigative agency. We oversee a number of lawyers, including some prosecutors. We do law enforcement training. We have a crime lab. We work on school safety issues and open government issues, crime victim services issues. And often what we're best known for is significant litigation involving the state. So as I mentioned, we are leading litigation challenging this old abortion ban and whether it applies in Wisconsin now that Roe has been overturned. PAs likewise prosecute cases in their jurisdictions. In some states, they're called state's attorneys, but there's a lot of discretion that prosecutors have and investigators have in how to use their resources. And that's really important with respect to reproductive freedom, because I have been clear, and some Democratic DAs in our state have been clear, that using the limited resources that we have to investigate or prosecute people for abortions would be a drastic misuse of our resources. I believe that our resources should go towards the most serious crimes like homicides or sexual assaults or drug trafficking. To divert resources from purposes like that to investigating and prosecuting abortions would be a huge mistake in my view. So we engage on legal issues in lots of different ways. And on public safety issues in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, thank you. And, I think people should take the time and look at who's running on the ballot and, make sure you know who you're voting for and don't vote for the first name or the name that sounds good. And just, can we expect anything? I know states are, right now it's just front lines and people are trying to stop a lot of laws from going into effect, and some of it is timing. But is there anything else that we can look for from the attorney generals in this area?
Yeah, so I think you'll also see a lot of effort across states. I mentioned before that we've been working with the Illinois AG's office, because a lot of states will end up with the situation where they may have an abortion ban, but other states may have laws that allow for access to safe and legal abortion, and figuring out ways to facilitate that so people are able to get the health care that they need is something I think we'll be involved in. And then, we also have an advocacy role. We have a bully pulpit, and we use that to advocate for legislative change. And, I've been clear that in addition to fighting in the courts, we need to fight for change both at the federal level by codifying Roe and in our state by passing legislation to address the situation that we're in. And, of course, persuading legislators to act is not always easy, but the more that people contact their legislators, the more that they use their voices, the more likely it is that they're going to feel that they have to take some action to respond to the DOPS decision.
Right. And one thing I want to mention is, we talk about the exceptions for rape and incest and life of the mother, but if you have a state where all the clinics are shut down, the exceptions don't really matter because there's nowhere to go. So keeping clinics open in all the states, has got to be just as important. And Nina, thank you for staying with us. And so I know everyone talked about what they can do and, what are the resources, and we're going to put those up again. Do you have any other thoughts in that area that are specific to you?
Yes, I was first going to respond to Shivani and tell you that I have a daughter who just graduated college and is thinking of going into law school. So I'm one of those desi parents who has said, do whatever you want to. I do have to confess, my other daughter is in medical school, so we've got it covered. So I think one of the things I wanted to mention is, again, as I said, hope, and the hopefulness comes from the mobilization of people. And there's a silver lining to this awful, heinous decision, is people are motivated and angry. You can see that already in the polls that have been taken. For example, in Georgia, where Senator Warnock was neck and neck with a crazy man running there, Herschel Walker, now he's 10 points ahead. Whether that'll sustain till election day, I don't know. But the point is to even see this huge bump in many places is encouraging. And it is for us who are engaged electorally to sustain that. In Pennsylvania, that is what we are looking to do. I also happen to wear a hat of being a member of the Pennsylvania Democratic State Committee. It's an elected position. And we just saw the investment the party is making. They just hired a Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander coalition director who is going to actually work with communities across Pennsylvania, and will be helping her to connect to communities who necessarily don't come out to vote because they're not encouraged to. They don't have in-language material. No one explains how the process works. So resources are going to be put in to make that difference if it's a close election. As Minnie pointed out, that we have a crazy man running for governor against our Democratic nominee. Our Democratic nominee is Josh Shapiro. He's our current state attorney general. So he's very well prepared to go in there and look at issues such as this. He's running against someone who's an insurrectionist who was there on January 6th. And maybe we'll be getting indicted before we even get to the election. That would be our hope. But mobilizing voters and mobilizing our Asian American and particularly our South Asian voters is going to be critical in these close elections. And more importantly, we have to also look at state legislatures. Like you were just talking about, Sonjui, that people don't know what they're voting for. That is the information sessions that we have to do, because our state legislature, what the House and the Senate, we don't control that as Democrats. So we need people to keep pushing that envelope and building a deep bench to have good people who will run. That's another thing, along with being a lawyer, I think, is entering politics, having a policy-oriented view of being a politician, being data-oriented. Those are things we need, and we need to encourage our children to get involved in that and really push to have legislators who respond and who understand the issues that matter to people. So in addition to all the other work, these are the long-term things. As someone pointed out, 50 years the Republicans have been working to demolish this. And the other party, meaning the people who support the Roe v. Wade and support access to abortion, weren't as vigilant. We should have been building our bench and pushing back, knowing full well this was going to happen. And so I think critiquing ourselves is important, and moving forward, knowing what we didn't do and where the gaps are and making that happen, and being sustained and having long-term vision is going to be very important.
Thanks so much, Nina. Well, I think having something change that you never thought was going to change is a great motivator. And I think that's what has happened with the Roe decision. We have a lot of questions on the chat, but I think what we're going to do is try to get them answered from our panelists. Many of us who have left, we'll preserve them and see if we can get some answers out to folks. People have some very interesting questions about IVF and contraception and things that, honestly, we never thought we'd be worried about. And AG Kaul, there was actually one that was directed right at you, if you want to take one, about a class action suit arguing a violation of life and liberty. I don't know if that's something that you've heard about at all.
I have not specifically. What I can say is that, unfortunately, the potential remedies through the federal courts there aren't going to be many, at least with regard to the basic fundamental right. And the reason for that is that the Supreme Court in Dobbs has weighed in on this and said that there's no constitutional right. But that doesn't mean that there won't be the possibility of winning cases in state courts. State courts can interpret their constitutions differently. And then, of course, every state has different laws, and those laws can have, different meanings, or there might be different aspects to them. So there definitely is going to be a lot of litigation over this. And we have filed suit in Wisconsin. And our suit, frankly, might not be the last one. There could be others. So I do think there will be challenges. But what they are remains to be seen, and I think will depend a bit on what laws states pass, how they respond. And again, ultimately, legal action is very important and can make a big difference. But equally important, if not more so, is making sure that people stay mobilized, because ultimately having legislators who are going to protect reproductive freedom and protect our rights rather than take them away is going to be critical.
Yeah, very well said. And really for Nina and I, in places like Georgia and Pennsylvania, we're in the midst of what our state is going to look like and how we're going to respond to some of these issues. So with that, we want to thank
Sonjui. I have one quick question. Maybe the Attorney General can answer that, or just put it out there. Behind me is a sign for the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, and how that will impact potentially if we can get it ratified and put and published by the National Archivist. There's a lot of litigation going on around that. Congress has to act on that. That I believe will give us much more leeway about rights based on sex. So maybe the Attorney General can make a quick point about that if he would.
Yeah, I'll just say there, as you said, there's litigation going on over whether the ERA was ratified. It's an unusual situation because enough states have ratified it for it to become an amendment, but it didn't happen the way that Congress had initially suggested, and we've joined with other states in arguing that it should be considered to be adopted. We'll see what happens there, but if it does come into effect, it would certainly bolster arguments. For one thing, it would allow for new arguments before the U.S. Supreme Court, because now there'd be a new constitutional provision that they would need to interpret, and it would strengthen an argument. How it would apply exactly, nobody really knows because it hasn't been applied yet, but it could only be helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Nina, for the questions. Thanks, Attorney General Kaul, for jumping in on that one on the fly. So with that, on behalf of SAFA, we want to thank all of our amazing speakers today, Amol and Minnie, who are not had to leave us early, and Dr. Roy, and Attorney General Kaul, Shivani, and Nina. This is such an important discussion. It's important for us to focus on, when we're in a crisis situation, what leads us there and what leads us out of it. There's so much on the line in November. There's so much work ahead for all of us to do as we mobilize our communities, educate them, and get them involved in the decisions that are so important to each of us. So join SAFA, South Asians for America, learn about so many volunteer opportunities that we have. We will continue to have sessions like this to keep you engaged and involved with us. We're going to escalate between now and November, so keep an eye out for our next programs, many of which are coming up in the next few weeks. So thank you again to all of you, and we will see you next time. Thanks, and thanks, Deepa.